Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Hi. My name is Lisa Karanen, and I'm the chair of the CU Denver Department of Communication, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this evening's Daniels Fund Colloquium on Ethics in Communication. Tonight we'll be focusing on how the media industry can continue to communicate ethically in a time of rapid industry change. And one thing we in the communication department know is that ethical communication can build stronger partnerships, stronger, more transparent societies. And that's what we're here to talk about this evening, is the role of the media, the role of journalism in promoting ethical communication. Now, those of you who know me know that I am normally very effusive in my thanks, but I'm going to refer you instead to all of the people in tonight's program who worked very hard behind the scenes to make this evening possible. But I do want to recognize our generous sponsors from the Daniels Fund. So Bo Pareto and Bruce Lumsden, please stand. We thank you. We thank you very much for your support. Without further fanfare, I'm going to turn the mic over to our moderator this evening, who is known to many of you because he was an anchor reporter on 9 News for more than 2 decades, and prior to that worked as an associate publisher for the Denver Business Journal. Currently, Greg Moss is the president and CEO of the Metro North Chamber of Commerce, which is a regional organization spanning 12 cities, 4 counties, and 6 school districts in northern Colorado. In addition to the work history described above, Greg has experience as a business owner, senior local manager, and educator. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies, the International Olympic Committee around the world, as executive director of the Mile High Church, and he has held several leadership positions in large nonprofits in the metro area. He moved to Colorado in 1985 from New Orleans, where he attended Loyola University, and I love this part, with a double major in communication and social work. He also has an honorary doctorate from the Colorado Institute of Art. He's received numerous awards for his community involvement and journalistic work. He currently serves on the board of directors of the Colorado Enterprise Fund, the North Area Transit Alliance, Smart Commute Metro North, the DRCOG Advisory Council, the Good Samaritan Hospital Foundation, and the Advisory Board of A Precious Child. So a lot of good works there. Please join me in welcoming Greg Moss.
Good evening, everybody. So just to clear the record, I am from New Orleans, and so ethics is kind of an oxymoron from what I grew up and how I grew up. But we're very glad that you're here with us this evening. As part of the Daniels Fund Colloquium on Ethics and Communication, we are seeking to explore and dive a little bit deeper into principle-based ethics in this rapidly changing environment that we all live in. So I want to give you a pause for just a moment and give you a little bit of introspect here. How many of you are familiar with Bill Daniels or the story of Mr. Daniels? If you're not, I would really encourage you to find out and learn a little bit more about him. He was an amazing business person. Sort of the rags to riches and he really stood on ethics and treating people very well and always living up to his word. Inside your program tonight, you will find the Ethics Initiative principles that we're going to touch on, hopefully throughout the evening with our panel here, talking about integrity, trust, accountability, transparency, fairness, respect, the rule of law, and viability. So I would just draw your attention into the program and learn more about that. Tonight we've gathered an esteemed group of journalists and leaders in the communications field. They're going to share their insights and a lot of their history and a lot of their experiences, all practicing journalism still today. It's an honor to introduce them to you now. Let me first begin with my good friend, right to my right here, Kathy Walker. She's the longtime news director of iHeartRadio's Denver flagship, that being KOA, the blowtorch of our area. She enjoys talking with a lot of interesting people from across the Denver metro area, but really across the world as well. She is a national board member of the Radio Television Digital News Association, RTDNA, and served as chairperson in 14. She's a mass communications graduate of CSU Pueblo, and also proud to be a Colorado native as well. Please welcome Kathy. Dana Caulfield is next to her. She's the senior editor for news at the Denver Post, the senior editor for news at the Denver Post, and Colorado native. She has worked at news organizations of all sizes, including the Rocky, Associated Press, in Denver, and Cheyenne, Weekly General Interest in business publications in Boulder and Larimer counties, and at the Daily Times column Longmont. Worked as a business editor at technology and natural products trade magazines. She left the Post in 2018 after about 15 years in the newsroom. She is now the co-founder and helped create the Colorado Sun. And I'm interested, we're going to have more perspective about that, I'm sure. So please welcome Dana to our panel. Mr. Greg Moore is right there. He's the editor-in-chief of a new publication. How do you pronounce that? Deek Digital. A Wheat Ridge-based company that helps position business execs and entrepreneurs as experts through published content in national trade publications. You may remember his name or know him. He spent 14 years as editor of the Post. During that time, the newspaper rose in prominence, winning 4 consecutive Pulitzers. His journalism career spanned more than 40 years, with stops in Dayton and Cleveland, 16 years at the Boston Globe. He was managing editor there from 94 to 02. He is a member of the Investor Foundation, University of Denver, America Succeeds, the Emily Griffith Foundation, and Polaris, the anti-human trafficking organization, which is based in D.C. And you were my boss at one time. Please welcome Greg Moore. And on our panel, Gerardo Lopez, an award-winning journalist with more than 2 decades of experience covering issues of importance to viewers in Dallas, Seattle, Houston, San Antonio, as well as Austin. So he represents the broadcast side here tonight. Lopez is currently the assistant news director for the Scripps-owned ABC station KMGH TV7. His thought leadership excites and engages viewers through meaningful, relevant stories which connect them to their communities and beyond. Were you the brainchild of 9360?
No, that was launched just before I got there.
Well, just take credit for it. We'll know.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
I'll take credit.
It's really great what you guys are doing. And Gerardo holds an incredibly high standard for journalism and works to expose the truth, drive accountability, and encourage action. You're going to hear a lot more about that in his passion tonight. Please welcome Gerardo. All right, that's our panel. We'll begin, and Kathy, I'll have you answer this first, if you don't mind. All of you will answer this question. You've been in the industry for a long time and have witnessed the evolution that we're experiencing and been seeing for some time close up. What are some of the changes and the pressures in the industry that media and journalism are facing and experiencing right now?
The biggest pressure in my world in a radio newsroom is that we've all had to learn how to do social media and do a website in tandem. And we thought we were really good at fast, right? We could find something out and be on the air in literally 60 seconds, right? And now we've had to be fast times 3. So for me, I would say the biggest pressure is to be correct, to be fair, and to be fast. And it's very hard to do on every story, every day, all the time, 24/7. But that's what's expected.
And where's the pressure coming from?
I think the pressure comes from metrics, in many
competition.
Right, in many respects, we have so much more data on what all you are doing, right? So the metrics of knowing how many people like us and share us and interact with us on social, as well as when I moved to Denver, we didn't have anything equivalent to what we have now with Nielsen ratings, where we get ratings almost instantly. I mean, the next day, we know how we did. And that's pretty unreal, like how much data we're churning through about how all of you are behaving. And then so to me, the pressure is, that competitive thing, as well as just trying to make the most out of all the information that we have on how to connect with you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that, to your point, that we're all struggling for relevance, right? That
Yes.
there are so many, everybody has so many choices. You have your Twitter, you've got your Twitter feed, you've got your TweetDeck, 50 million ways to consume that, 50 million ways to consume Facebook, 50 million ways to consume TV. you can watch it on your laptop, you can watch it live, you know, there's just so much. And so there is a pressure to say, oh, we are meaningful to you in this way, and you should keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back. And we do struggle with, we want to be first, but we want to be thorough and accurate. That's super, the most important thing, and because there's so much inaccurate on all of the social media platforms that can just kill you. It's terrible. And also the people's copy desk. So if you mess up, you're going to find out quick.
Right.
See, I would say that the greatest change and the greatest pressures in some ways are the same thing. I would say technology. As they say, a lie can get all the way around the world before truth has its pants on. And so, you know, mainstream media is always chasing something. It's always chasing and then trying to find a way to go your own way. And then that whole stream is just very difficult. And of course, in the process, we end up confusing you all, right? So, on the other hand, you know, technology has sort of allowed us to do our jobs better than ever before, but it hasn't necessarily come up with, helped us come up with a financing mechanism to support the journalism that we do. So, I think that in some ways, the challenge is the fight to exist. I mean, we're in a fight to exist, and that makes you desperate sometimes. You start doing things that you shouldn't do. You start chasing clicks. You start feeding people what it is they want, that they tell you that they want, instead of, you know, you trying to tell them things that they need to know. And that's the pressure points, I think, that we're facing in terms of pressure. But I believe through ethical decision making and having a moral center about the work that we do, that we're going to come out pretty good on the other side. At least I hope so.
Yeah, no, a lot of what we were talking about earlier with social media, digital, that is a big challenge for us now. Back when I started, the internet was just getting started. There was no email, and now all of a sudden it's constant. There's always a right now mentality. How are you going to get me the information that's first, that's accurate? I'm like, a lot of times, I don't want to be first with wrong information, because that's how you can ruin your credibility, and I've seen it happen to a lot of TV stations. The other part is making sure that you're covering stories that you can't Google, because you can get everything right now on your phone. So the challenge for me, the challenge for the reporters, the producers, find stories you can't Google. Is it Google proof? How are you going to make it relevant? And how are you going to, what you were saying, I want to serve you veggies. I want to make sure you're living a healthy lifestyle. I don't want to serve you fast food restaurants that were the low-hanging fruit, what we call in the business. I want you to learn something by watching what we're doing, watching our reporters. So that's, you know, the challenge for me and the changes that have taken place since I started in the late 90s.
I think, well, I was just going to say, it's really easy for one to create the clickbait mentality, right? And we were doing this 2 weeks ago. The Colorado Sun sort of divorced itself from having to do real breaking news, like we're not doing cops and robbers and that kind of thing. So we were sitting around the newsroom talking about the guy who fought off the mountain lion, and we're like, well, what would we do if we were trying to get clicks? And we were making all kinds of jokes, like, hey, can somebody figure out if there are any mountain lion fighting gyms that are going to open up, or is there a workout that you can do that make you more likely to be able to do this? And then somebody made a joke about, you know, the Daily Camera, the liberal Boulder, would write an editorial that said, jogger erred in not trying to tame the cat. And we make all these jokes about it. And then boom, 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 a couple days ago, shows up on my Facebook feed, our animal advocacy group saying that guy killed a mountain lion kitten. And I was like, oh my God. You know, it happens very quickly, and it's very easy to buy into that mentality. And is that really useful to make a workout like that? You know, somebody probably is working on it, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing to pursue.
While we're on that subject, I'm going to stick with you for just a moment. So back to our principles, when we look at integrity, trust, transparency, all of those things. trust has taken a pretty big hit in the media. You probably all know that, probably every day, but especially in the last couple of years. The local media enjoys higher rates of trust than what you're seeing in national media. What do you think journalists can do to increase the public trust?
Not writing about the mountain lion. That's one thing. We are trying to be very transparent about the kind of reporting that we're doing, and we're sharing a lot of documents. So if we, write about, I think we wrote about higher ed story where we talked about tuition increases and how many, the University of Colorado's Boulder campus is about ready to be majority out-of-state students, and what does that look like? So we shared the documents that went along with all of that research, in part to prevent people who would be defenders coming forward and saying, oh, that's not true, and explaining the formulas that are used to determine what they use to show how many students come from where, and just letting people know that there is truth out there, that it's not all politics, and you too can look at these documents and perhaps draw the same conclusion that we have. And just being able to share that, I mean, it's scary to do it because then we're giving it to our competitors, but it's important to give it to our readers as well.
Or
No, well, as far as trust, it's just putting a mirror to what's going on in the city. It's putting a mirror at the state capitol. What are the issues that are being discussed? Why are these important to our citizens? And how can we, do a better job of explaining everything that's going on? And then to your point, when we're doing investigations, making sure that all the documents that we have received from our tipster or sources is out there. That way you can actually go through them yourselves as well. So that usually will help us.
So I think that I've always said that the closer you are to a story, the more careful you have to be. So local journalism, just by the very nature of it, you want to be right, because if you're wrong, the impact is exponentially bigger than if the New York Times makes a mistake about something about Denver, right? And so I think that there's a greater accountability and transparency. I think that has existed for a long time, even though we do make mistakes and we can be arrogant, we try not to make the big ones. On the other hand, the big guys, like when they make mistakes, it's magnified. Like a classic example of that is the BuzzFeed story on Cullen, right? So they break this big story, it's the entire talk of the country. They just basically say, hey, look, we stand by the story. And I want them to be right. I would want them to be right, because as a new player on the scene, if they're right and they gain credibility, it helps us all survive. So I want them to be right. I'm not rooting for anybody to fail here. We're in enough trouble as it is. But the fact that it's been 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then yesterday Cohen himself testified under oath and said, I never said that the president directed me to lie to Congress, and you still have no explanation, you still have no clarification, you still have no correction. And so it's when you behave that way that your ethics are called into question, that trust is affected, accountability is like nil, and transparency is not there. Like, you have to own up to mistakes when you make them, and you need to do it close to real time than belatedly after the fact. And I'm really hoping that they step up and fix that, because they've done some good reporting. But when you make a mistake, you just gotta step up, own it, and then do what you can to make sure you don't do it again.
And my only addition to that is I think I'm so lucky to be in talk radio. Okay? You might all talk about, like, oh my God, all the opinions that get shared on talk radio. But honestly, we have trained our audience. You got a problem with that? Call us up. I can't even begin to tell you how interactive my media has always been. And we've always been willing to go, keep that, yeah, we'll bring it on. Like, what can you share with me that would change my mind about that? And so I think having a safe place for really spirited debate, and where you're wrong, I'm right, and we all kind of stand on an edge of the cliff there and say, prove it, is really benefited me as a journalist. It's really okay to have conversations with people in our community who might believe differently than something they heard on our air. And oftentimes that breeds really great stories.
So let's, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's really hard to say that you made a mistake.
It is.
You know, I've worked with Greg for a really long time, and I made an epic mistake, and I thought for sure he was gonna kick me to the curb, thought for sure. But we just had to own it, you know, we just had to own it, and once you do, it's very liberating, because you can, yeah, I messed up, and to have that relationship with your audience, to be able to say you're wrong, and be able to say, yes, you're right, I'm wrong, it creates community. I mean, we talked about that a little bit. Our readers and our listeners and our watchers are all part of our community. We need them to police us as much as we need to police them, I think.
So Greg, and again, we've talked about community quite a bit, and it is a common theme, and it's important, especially in local news. But Greg, how can you build a sense of community with local media? Why is it important? And as we were talking a little bit earlier, how do you maintain that balance when you have those kinds of?
So, you know, one of the things I think great local journalism organizations do is they have convening power, like bringing people together and having them discuss uncomfortable ideas. I think is really important. I think challenging the community to be better, like having an aspiration, not the lowest common denominator, but the highest common denominator, that you're really trying to make your community better. So you're challenging it all the time, and you're creating a safe place for honest debate. And we were talking about this earlier, and I think it's really important. Like, you have to know where the line is, okay? I mean, you can't move all the way into the advocate role, right? Because I think that's where we're in trouble with a lot of our media, is they're in the advocacy area of journalism. They're not in the sort of the factual verification space. And I think we need more emphasis on facts and trust the sources of information than just, you know, people spouting their opinions. As somebody says, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own set of facts. And I think that's what journalism is. We've got to keep our eye on the ball on that. The organizations that do that, I think, are invited to have a seat at the table, a community table. And I think that what we want is a place at the community table to be trusted and to be able to say tough things to help make us all better. And I think organizations that take that role seriously, really, they benefit from the reservoir of trust.
And you're right. Fairness is a big piece of that.
Right, absolutely. So for us, it's giving solutions to issues that we expose. For us, it's using the Our Colorado brand to build that trust within communities. If it's talking about growth, or if it's talking about some of the great things that are happening here. And so for us, that's one of the ways that we can build trust. Then there's also our Contact 7, not all this big advocacy journalism. But we do want to give a voice to the little guy. We want to help right the wrongs that are happening in our community, even if it's just a simple email that comes into the newsroom. Like today, there was a guy who went to get a flu shot from the same clinic he's been going every single year for the last 10 years. It just so happened the last time he went, it was an out-of-network doctor, and so he was billed close to $1,000. And so for us, it was just a simple phone call that we were able to make, and they were able to say, okay, we screwed it up. We're only gonna charge him $100, but still, that's, you know, insane. So that's one of the many ways that we're able to build community and trust within the city of Denver and the state.
And again, from that. Okay, Ken.
No, go ahead.
Okay. This is the portion where I want to remind you that this is interactive. We will have a chance to answer some of your questions in just a few minutes or so. You should have note cards, I believe, or you got some note cards, is that correct? Or you will have note cards. If you have a question, just kind of raise your hand, we'll pass out a note card, we'll collect those, and we'll get those to our panelists here again in about 10 or 15 minutes or so. Jordan, let's go to another question here about user-generated content. It is becoming increasingly important on a lot of different scales, especially social media, but also in mainstream media as well. What do you think that some of the benefits are, and of course the potential ethical landmines that come about as a result of that?
So the benefits, you know, I'll use the DPS strike as an example. There were some schools that we weren't able to get into, and there was video that was sent to us from inside a school of kids, you know, going bonkers, if you want to call it that. It's those are some of the benefits, but then some of the landmines that we can sometimes fall into is what happened in DC with the Native American and the high school kids from the Catholic school in near Cincinnati. Everyone saw that video, everyone drew their own conclusion, but we didn't know what happened before that person posted that video up until maybe 2 or 3 days later. So those are some of the landmines that I think a lot of us can fall into, and that's where we have to ask ourselves, what was happening before? You know, there was a time in Seattle where we had the massive landslide that killed up to 40 or just over 40 people. I was working that day, and I still remember one of the stations posting a picture, and I'm like, I don't know if that's real, and I don't know where they got that from, but I'm not going to start looking for pictures until I know it's verified from an actual emergency department up there. Because I've been in other newsrooms when, oh, I'm just gonna use this picture that I saw on Twitter, and it's a picture that's been circulating on the internet for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm like, I don't want to fall into that trap, and that's where the trust goes out the door when you have to correct yourself and say, oh, you know what, we just took that over there because we didn't bother to ask any questions. Go ahead.
Well, and that takes a ton of discipline to hold back like that. And Greg will remember during the Aurora Theater shooting, it happened in the middle of the night, and everybody had Twitter, and there were jillions of user-generated facts going around where 50 million people are dead, the entire town of Aurora blew up, and as it spread out further and further, the claims got more extreme and more extreme. And it was really hard. We were very fortunate to have a great overnight editor who was just as disciplined as he could possibly be and didn't post anything or retweet or move any information, because he understood the gravity of the situation and how unfamiliar people were and how frightened they were. And so with that understanding, he knew he had a greater responsibility to his community to make sure that the absolute facts were the things that were being transmitted by the Denver Post on that night.
I would just add to that, because I'm very proud of that coverage, and we did not have a single correction, not a single correction. And our whole mantra was, if we haven't verified it ourselves, I don't care what it is, we don't publish it. And believe me, the pressure was extreme. To answer the question, I was saying, I was talking to my students about this today. Hey, students. Like barriers to entry when it comes to journalism is completely different now. Before we had a monopoly, you had to have a printing press, you had to have access to ink and paper and trucks and all that. And now all you need is the technology, right? Everybody's a publisher, but not everybody is a journalist. And I think the thing that is distinguishing is sort of like these ethical principles, right? There are ethics behind the collection and dissemination of news that the average person who just wants to transmit content, they don't adhere to those things, okay? Like, independence and transparency and accountability and truthfulness. They don't. And so it's sort of like what he was saying, that, people circulate photos that have actually been on conspiracy sites for the last 5-10 years. He said, oh yeah, I was taken yesterday. So I don't want to dismiss the value of citizen-generated content, whatever that means. And I think, like, for example, if, some window washers are downtown and they're on the 12th floor, and the scaffolding breaks and they're holding on and swinging back and forth, and a citizen has a video camera and they video that and send it to us, thank you. We're very happy about that. But if you're going to tell me that 10 people just got mowed down on Arapahoe and 14th, I want that verified. I'm not putting that out there. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to be journalists, to actually understand the science of collecting and verifying information and authenticating facts. There's a difference between information and journalism, and I think that it's important for you, the consumer, to understand that, and it's certainly important for us to guard against it just willy-nilly getting on the air and getting on our websites.
And sources lie to us, maybe not intentionally, but we're working on some pieces for the upcoming 20th anniversary of Columbine. And we've talked about why that was such an impactful story in Denver. And I was on the air that day. I'm gonna tell you why. Because we went to bed that night thinking there were 50 dead kids in a high school. Because that's what the sheriff told us, right? So here we are telling our community and all of the parents in this very microcosm of a community that there were 50 dead people in that high school. It was wrong. I still remember, I can visualize the front page of the Rocky the next day with a horrible photograph, 50 dead, right? Well, there wasn't 50 dead. But people lie to us. So I guess I just, sometimes I just get so frustrated with the media's this and the media's that. Well, people lie to us. And they do it sometimes to manipulate. I don't know what that sheriff thought he saw in the building that day. I don't know. But it was wrong. And we were all wrong for hours and hours and hours.
And sometimes it is intentional, to your point about the East High School video. If DPS had its spin that day.
They said, come to this school.
Exactly, there's a
Everything's
reasonable
fine.
school that's totally staffed and everything is fine, nothing to see here, folks. But even though obviously everybody needed to verify that those videos were correct, there were so many of them that came out, you couldn't not know that there was some chaos that happened that day.
It's a fine line. And Kathy's looking, how many journalism students do we have with us tonight? Raise your hand. A lot. And so Kathy and I worked Columbine together. In fact, I happened to be the first journalist on scene, and so because of that, I was trapped inside the perimeter for almost 10 hours. And so if you want to know what the sheriff was thinking, he was right next to me. And I can tell you some stories in my book.
But it's true, like that wouldn't happen, and I don't think in the same way now because we were so insulated. We have all the high school kids telling us how many bodies they saw on the floor of the library.
Right.
And that did not happen in that environment.
But that's the point. We were in so the reason I ask about students in here, you are the future journalists, potentially. And the pressure that you will feel on a story like that cannot be taught in a classroom because it is your community, it's your friends, it's your family, it may be somebody you know that is in the middle of all of that. And I would just say, if you go to the Poynter Institute and you look up some of their white papers, specifically on Columbine, and you'll find 9 News in there rather a lot as a result of something called phoners. And so you talk about sources lying. One of my colleagues, unfortunately, was kind of not paying too much attention at the desk, but with a lot of pressure from the news desk to just put people on the air. And there was a call from a young man who claimed he was inside Columbine, inside the classroom when the shooting was going on, and he was ready to go on the air. They put him on the air, and he started describing this in vivid detail. He was in a closet, he needed help, etc. That young man was actually calling from Salt Lake City, Utah. And he had developed sort of a reputation and was eventually charged with making these kind of calls. But we got on the air for about 5 minutes. Can you imagine what that was like?
I know people who have called stations in Houston during hurricanes to, just tell whatever the station wanted to hear. And I'm sitting back and like, why'd you put them on the air? And of course they prank them and then, okay, next caller. So even being in the newsroom though, like during working out the competition, I'm like, no. I'm like, I don't know that for sure. I'm like, tell him to take a picture. I want him to write this, and I want to see this site right now.
We've talked a lot about transparency and the need to admit when you're wrong. So I'll open it up to whoever wants to talk about this. But what do you do in yourself personally as a journalist and in your organization to bolster transparency and accountability in your reporting, either amongst your staff or your teammates or yourself? Anyone would like to?
I think what we were talking about earlier, especially when we're doing investigations, if we have documents, let's just make them readily available. Let's make sure that, we can put our homework out there. That way people can, come up with their own conclusion, just like we came up with our conclusion by getting this fact, this source, this source, this source, and let them inspect it, that way they can go, okay, I see where they came to the conclusion for this.
The thing I was saying earlier to the students is that it's about rigor and the expectation that there's a certain process you go through in the verification of information and weighing about whether or not to publish it. And the more you model that, the more everybody else understands that that's how they're supposed to model the evaluation of the information that they have. That's the way I was trained to do it at the Porter Institute. And that way you end up, having a ethical overlay of your decision making that really applies to almost every story you do. It may only take 30 seconds in some cases, it may take 2-3 minutes, it might take 15 minutes, or it might be a day-long conversation. But the more you do it, the more you model it, the more confident you are that you can defend why you did what you did, whether you publish or whether you don't. And I think that's important.
Learned empathy, the master, all of the things that he said, but also, again, being disciplined about your reporting. We just did a project with the University of Colorado News Corps students, and one of the stories that they did involved educational redlining, where they looked at redlined neighborhoods and what was going on in schools there. And I went to a career fair in the fall. He came up and he was like, I got this data, this is what I'm going to write about, it's going to be rock, and all the kids in Westwood are going to Colorado Academy. That's what he had found.
Right.
And I was like, what? He came up like this, really? Are you sure? And he was like, yeah, all the kids are choicing out of Westwood into Colorado Academy because people who are moving into that neighborhood can afford to pay the prices there. And so logically it made sense to me. I was like, yeah, okay, that's great. Look forward to seeing that when you turn it in a couple months. And so they turned in the story, and that wasn't in there. Because once you start looking at it, is that really relevant? Is it really true? Are kids from Westwood really able to afford this fancy private school? Probably not. And it took great discipline to leave that data out. There may have been some anecdotal information around it that suggested that kids were choicing out of DPS into private school, but they couldn't back it up. And yay on them for having the discipline at the ages of 20 and 21 to be able to say, no, we're not going to go with that.
I love what you had to say about modeling, because I do think that's how you spread like your ethics across the newsroom. I routinely apologize to our news radio listeners in the middle of the newsroom on the phone. I will apologize, and I will also defend my reporters on the phone in front of everyone. I mean, I just really feel like they need to see both of those behaviors in me as their news director.
Okay. We asked for questions. If you have written down a question on a note card, just kind of raise it up. If you don't mind, we'll collect those and we'll get to those here in just a few minutes. Danny, before we get to the audience questions, you had mentioned earlier about clickbait. How do you balance the need to tell these hard-hitting policy stories with the need to attract eyeballs or viewers, listeners? How do you do that in today's environment?
Well, we are not so much in the business of the things that I know to be very effective clickbait anymore, and it's been a great relief to me to not have to write the stories about the lesbian prison guards who were caught having sex in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven. And it's very liberating to not have to do that anymore because it's just period. And those people who were reading that story were just drive-by traffic. They were doing nothing for us at the Denver Post but raising numbers. So I'm super expert at doing that kind of work, but it doesn't create a good community of readers. And so we are trying to figure out ways to tell stories in an innovative way that make people care. Like every story has to have a make me care statement in it. Not that literally, but think about it. You're gonna write about this, make me care about it. And one I've been citing pretty regularly because it's a super accessible story was an obituary that one of our reporters wrote for 2 giant trees down in a forest outside of Durango. And it could have just been a cool picture of this woman standing in front of the gigantic tree, but we were able to use the death of these 2 oldest trees in Colorado to tell the story of drought and make it relevant. You know, it is actually killing these really old pins out there. It's not just us complaining about not having enough water to go rafting. And so trying to be careful and innovative about our story choices and making sure that if you come to our website to read our stories, that you see something that resonates with you. You could relate to it either as a consumer of the thing that we're writing about or understand the way somebody else is experiencing it.
Anyone else?
Oh, I'll take it.
Okay.
So it goes back to what you mentioned earlier with the 360 brand. This is where I'm able to work with the reporters and making those policy stories interesting and more digestible for our viewers. It's taking it and going, okay, how can we work with the graphics department? How can we make this story come to life instead of just being a boring policy story or your veggies? And like, let's dress it up. I kind of like to think that what we're doing in Channel 7 is like a steakhouse versus some of the other TV stations where I think, okay, they're serving McDonald's hamburgers. I want to be able to take the veggies and find all the different flavors or the different characters or the different hard-hitting policy stories, make them interesting, have them come to life, and then ask, you know, for different perspectives. It's like, we can have this perspective on the sex ed bill when it comes to a teacher. It's the Catholic school teacher. It's the parent. It's the parent who says they need to have their kid informed about sexual education. It's another who says, I don't want you to be telling my kids about sex ed. And so it's going through all that and figuring out ways to make it exciting and relevant to our viewers. And so I'm okay with, you know, staying away from the clickbait. I'm like, don't care. Kind of like what you mentioned earlier. Those are just going to drive numbers. I'm trying to drive trust. I'm trying to build that community atmosphere, and I'm trying to make this city a great place. Because you'll hear me say, we live here. Put a mirror. We should be proud of where we live. We should always be looking out for each other and giving a voice to the voiceless.
And just some of the backstory of 360 that I know, that actually came from hours and hours of viewer research. I
Yes.
mean, your folks sitting in people's homes, watching
Seek research.
watch TV news.
And what I always think, and I'm, you know, sometimes we did a 360 story on kids and screen time, or just people in screen time. I'm thinking about, you know, the moms. I'm thinking about my sister-in-law and my nephew and my nieces who they'll have 2 or 3 cell phones. I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, those are, you know, that it's not a clickbait story, but it could be, you know, an interesting, relevant story, because as we continue to live in this digital age, that's all you're seeing. It's like, put it down. And I'm like, the world is going by. Talk to one another. It's okay.
Director.
I can't add anything to that.
Kathy, anything?
No.
All right, Kathy, I'm gonna give you this question.
Okay.
This comes from our audience, because I know you have personal experience with this. Do you see any particular ethical challenges in relying on public relations practitioners to provide you local news? See, that comes to you.
Yes.
If so, how do you manage those challenges?
Boy, I've been around so long, part of it is relationships. You know, I know the PR people who are actually helping me get to a source of a story on some level, and the ones who are really just trying to sell me something. I clearly know lots of PR people who are former journalists,
Yeah.
and they really can approach you with, this is the reason I think this person would be interesting to talk to about this, but you gotta do your own interview. You know, they're not handing me an interview, they're not handing me a press release. But as the number of journalists shrinks, I mean, we do rely on public relations people, and all you have to do is be burned once. It's that relationship, you know, if somebody burns you and brings you somebody that is really not ethical about what they're speaking about or not willing to speak from a very honest point of view, yeah, you're done. You're done with them, and they know it. You know, they know.
All right, you work the assignment desk at a TV station.
Yeah, I always ask, what's the story? What's the character? I'm like, are you trying to use me or are you trying to help me? If you're trying to use me, I'm gonna know right off the bat. But if it's a great story that's happening in a community that we can actually help, maybe it's a nonprofit, I'm gonna be more sympathetic, but I'm also gonna be asking all of these different questions. That way I can say, okay, that's a great demo target story, or that fits this brand for us.
Greg, I've got an interesting question for you, especially in our conversation a little bit earlier. Given the pressures from advertisers for clickbait, numbers, eyeball, the only opposing force right now is journalists, professional ethics. What's your ideal world solution for fostering the journalism we need for a functioning democracy? Is it publicly funded media, subsidiaries, subscription models, or perhaps something else?
So, I think almost everything needs to be re-examined about how we do our work and everything, with the exception of independently gathering and presenting facts. I think it's a combination of all those things. I think it's a combination of a subscription model. I think philanthropy is going to become increasingly important. I was talking to a good friend of mine about this last week, and she reminded me that, 25 years ago or so, none of us would have ever thought that, the arts, the ballet, the orchestra, the symphony would be funded mostly by donors and philanthropy. And so why can't that happen for journalism? But I would go even further. I believe that we need to find a way to use the technology at hand and make it easier for people like you to purchase the journalism that you consume. Just like, 20 years ago, people thought that music was going to be free, right? Napster had destroyed the model, and now we pay for music and we don't think anything about it. And that same future could be there for us. I think included in that menu of options is public financing of journalism. And I know that people just go crazy and they go like, wow, we can't have government supporting journalism. And I'm like, well, come on, let's not be purists about this, all right? Like advertisers, the businesses in this community that was underwriting newspapers and television for the last 50 years, we covered them. Nobody said that was a conflict. We built walls, everyone accepted there was a wall between editorial and business, right? But those people called up and they were pissed off that we were writing about, like, I'll give you a great example. I remember, and this is how journalists think, right? For a long time, we were divorced from the business side. So it was President's Day, I'll never forget it. And it's the biggest single day for car sales, right? And I spent 2 weeks putting our package together for that Monday, which is about how car dealers really just try to rip you off, okay? And, had all these examples and charts and numbers and all this kind of stuff. And the car dealers, people have been trying to convince us not to do that. Like, why would you, on the biggest day that we have, put that on the front page of the paper, and I'm paying, your salaries and stuff. And I'm like, hey, go talk to the advertising people, like I'm trying to help the reader, right? And so the publisher just calls me up on the phone very calmly and says, Greg, do you understand what you're doing? Do you really feel like you have to do that? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, I'm on the phone, but I knew that I would be in trouble here. Like, if this blows up, sure enough, the next day, like a bunch of these auto dealers pulled their advertising. It's like $2 million annually. They pulled their advertising for like about 6 weeks, and like the guy was walking around the halls like, now looking at me, now speaking to me and stuff like that. But to act like the advertisers didn't try to influence what we were doing is crazy. And I think the same will be true any model that we pursue. It's just a matter of what kind of safeguards we put in place. But I think it should be as easy for the public to support journalism, like they do campaign fund checkoff. Like, do you want to donate $3 to political campaigns? Do you want to donate $3 to local journalism? I think we should explore everything. If it works for the BBC in the UK, if it works for National Public Radio with the Corporation for Public Financing, I think we can find a way where the public can be more engaged in the funding of journalism, and it should be as easy as possible.
Anyone else?
I'm frightened by that, and yet I know you speak the truth. I've always worked in an advertising-supported model environment. I know that part of our success is our ability to bring ratings, and that advertising piece is very separate from what I do. And yet I have to be honest. It's not sustainable, probably. on into the future for journalism. And I don't know what the right answer is, but it's got to change.
Well, I'm in it right now, so
You're in
figuring it out, trying to figure out a new model and working within all of these very uncomfortable places where we're actually going out and asking people for catalytic capital. Right off the bat, the foundation called us up when we announced ourselves last summer and said, we would like to give you money for a reporting position. And everybody in my group was like, oh, Larry, oh my God, they're gonna try and influence everything that we're gonna do. And we got our check and 2 years of funding, and the person who gave us the money hasn't spoken to us. They're just want to get out of the way. They think the issue is important and they want to support it. So we are figuring out ways that we can participate with our local foundations. We've had news from the major arts foundation in Colorado that their arts organizations are struggling because they're not able to get any coverage in the local publications. And so they're trying to figure out a way that they can support arts coverage in publications to make sure that your local theater company, they're not talking about the Denver Center, they're talking about the small theater companies, the small dance companies that are absolutely critical to the fabric of our community are able to survive. And if that means underwriting a reporting position with the Colorado Sun or someplace else, they're thinking about doing it. And we've established a relationship with the Pointer Foundation down in Florida so that we can take those contributions through them, and the foundations or individuals can get their tax break, and then it just gets forwarded onto us. And we're working on trying to get the money moved through the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition instead, so we can fund a local organization. But we're working on these ways that we can participate with these well-funded foundations that find themselves very concerned about their constituent groups as well. We also think that there's an equity issue around subscribing to the news, and we understand that we, as a collective, screwed up by not charging for news when we first started putting it online. But now people are used to that. So how can we continue to distribute as far and broad as TV does, and also have subscribers? So we have worked really hard to develop a community of supporters. So we hope never to have to put a paywall up, but in order to do that, we're going to ask you to pay $5 a month because it's the right thing to do. And that's working well. We're having a surprising number of people who are engaged in that. So there are just different ways to fund, and hopefully we'll all get there soon, before it's too late.
Just one last thing I would add. Right now in Canada, there's this huge issue, right? There's legislation that's already been voted on and approved to provide $650 million a year in public financing to struggling local newspapers in Canada. It's a huge debate. It's a huge debate. But we're moving in that direction. People realize that journalism is central to democracy. You can find an ethical way to do it, and to publicly finance something that is an important leg of the stool for our democracy, that means you've got to look at things in a different way. I mean, the advertising model was developed in the 1920s or whatever for a particular commercial reason, and now we're in a different era. And, I think if you take the good minds that are on this side of the table or this side of the table, then we can figure this thing out. But I'm hopeful that we're going to see another sort of iteration of public financing for journalism that will be right up there with the BBC and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and what the model is in Canada, and then see what emerges here. But check that out, it's really interesting.
And I'm going to go to you for this next question because I think you lived it for a little while. Given that hedge funds are increasing by buying up news media for the goal to maximize shareholders' values and revenues is met, what are some of the ethical values of journalism that you are not willing to compromise on when you're working in that kind of environment?
See the arrests in the 7-Eleven parking lot? And that really was the thing that pushed me over the edge, having to assign somebody to do that story. So I don't think that the people who, let's stipulate to the fact that without that hedge fund, the Denver Post might not exist today. And so we have to remember that, and there are business organizations that do what they do, which is buy distressed assets and patch them up for whatever reason, and we just have to understand that the reason that the Denver Post exists today is because that hedge fund came into being, and that's really sad and tragic, but they didn't influence my ethics as a journalist or influence my colleagues' willingness to go to the mat for really important stories and keep digging and keep working hard. I mean, I think that we, you, me, the people who remain there, remain committed to the craft and understand the importance of journalism to the function of society, community, and democracy. And no matter what those jerks do, you know, what happened yesterday, before yesterday was terrible in Boulder. It's terrible. The executive editor died. His funeral was on Monday or Tuesday, and everybody came back to the office and they announced more layoffs. And it's just like, what more? How bad could the optics possibly be? And I'm sort of blathering on about it, but I think people who are in the craft and they take on a lot of work and they work hard and they're committed, and no matter the squeezing, it doesn't change that. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Super emotional. PTSD.
Gerardo will take a breath and get to ask you this
That's a
question.
funny question.
Okay. The funny questions are coming up last. Gerardo, this one's for you. What do you think of the New York Times, if you are familiar with this, the New York Times, I think it's their new video initiative, the opinion video initiative, that's trying to make them more relevant to younger audiences by adopting the YouTube genre practice. And if you're not familiar with that, just in general, how is a newsroom like yours trying to attract that younger audience who's not watching local television like they used to?
Right, so I've seen a little bit of what the New York Times has done. We will try to do snackables, is what we call it at our TV station, where it's maybe a minute to a minute 30, and it's a different graphic look of what you're seeing. Sometimes you'll see a reporter talking about the story that they're working on and why they're passionate about it, and why, you know, it was just really an amazing or inspiring story that they worked on. Or, you know, there was a story that we did Sunday night on the drag racing that's been going on along I-25, and it was, you know, a really interesting story that we were able to work on for the last 3 weekends. And watching that, you know, it gave you a little bit of what the story was going to be about. So we'll use those to kind of look ahead to what's coming up on our 10 o'clock or our 6 o'clock news, but those are kind of the videos that we'll use to really try to target millennials and others who are on social media, because that's another way that we can essentially expose you to our brand and hopefully be able to get you to watch what we're talking about.
Is it sort of the behind the story type things that you're like?
We'll call it more to the story.
Okay.
And it is what we'll do, and we'll interview the reporter and ask them questions about what engaged you here, why did you, what was a surprise that you didn't expect, and what can we, you know, expect to see in your story.
Kathy, this one's for you directly.
Okay.
How do you reconcile being a journalist and being a host of an opinion-centered radio show?
I'm not both, and so that's kind of the advantage in that I run the newsroom, which we're journalists, we don't really have a dog in the fight, we're there to tell the truth, and the people who are opinionated on our radio station are managed by someone separately. They don't report to me. In fact, once in a while we do this, and that's okay. But I think for long-time talk radio listeners, they get it. You know, they get it that here's the news from, 1 to 105, and then here's the opinionated person, and then we come back in and give you the news. And I think for the most part, it works. I think the hardest, most polarizing person on our air is not the person who lives among us. It's Rush Limbaugh. How do you have Rush Limbaugh on your radio station and people not have very strong opinions one way or the other about him? So I would say the hardest part of being at KOA is not anybody I run into the hallway that has an opinion. Michael Brown, the former head of FEMA, who's on our air, is a really smart, really funny guy. He's even a lawyer, and I still think he's funny. I don't, I'm not buying into every opinion that he has at all, but, it's Rush that's really polarizing. And I think that's always gonna be the case. I can remember when we thought Paul Harvey was that guy because Paul Harvey did endorsement spots, right? Before you heard the rest of the story, you heard Paul Harvey talking about whatever product he wanted you to buy. He was an incredibly successful pitchman. And now that guy is Rush Limbaugh, who is an incredibly successful pitchman. And there's great case studies about LifeLock, some of the longtime customers that he's had, that he literally has taken businesses that wanted a national platform and didn't know how to get it, and they let him do it. So I don't know how to reconcile that always, I don't.
Polar, it's much simpler time.
I know, but he was viewed as, like Murrow. I mean, those guys smoked cigarettes on the set and talked about Texaco. I mean, we've been through all this before. It's just, it's how do we make the business model work and still be honest. I just want to be honest with all of you. That's hard.
So let's this is for all of you actually, so let's be honest about trust and respect and actually rule of law internally and the organizations that you work for or have worked with in the past. So the question is, did you all struggle in your career, either as a person of color or being a woman, such as experiencing racism, sexism, etc.? And talk more about how you handled that, if that was your experience.
Well, I think you got it all covered here. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I've experienced some things where I felt like race played a factor in it, but I've also been running newsrooms or pieces of newsrooms since I was 28 years old, and sometimes I think it was just because I was a jerk. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I was over-managing people and things of that nature. But what I learned over time, when you're not really sure of yourself, you end up swallowing things that you would never swallow if you were more confident, if you were more self-assured. And so I swallowed a few things. Like I remember not getting some assignments that I thought I deserved when I was really young, and this white guy seemed to get all the assignments, and we were the same age, and I was like, I don't get it. Like, why is that? And the guy said something like, well, the early bird gets the worm. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? I mean, I'm supposed to be here at 10 o'clock, we come here at the same time. I mean, the fact that Sean might be here at 10 minutes to 10, what does that mean? That's ridiculous. I don't buy that. So I thought that was on the other side of the ledger. But my favorite one is, I was a editor in Boston, and I had just gotten there, so I was nervous. I had lost a lot of weight, just the stress of being at this big time newspaper was killing me. And we were about to have this hurricane hit Boston, and I was in charge of our local news operation. So the boss of my desk said to me, hey, you need to put together a plan for covering the hurricane. So I invented this, call tree, gave everybody assignments, and then I had to present it at the morning meeting that Friday morning because it was supposed to hit Friday evening. And I did the presentation and everything, and the guy says in front of everybody else, all the other assistant editors and everything, wow, Greg, I'm really surprised, that's really good. And I was like, my hair was about to explode, okay? I was upset. Also, no, actually it was on Thursday he did that. So I'm just storming around, I go home and I tell my wife, about this, and I'm really mad we didn't have a dog, but I would have kicked it if I did. And just kidding, dog lovers. And she was like, look, why are you yelling at me? And why don't you go talk to him, right? And so I was like, you know what? That's right. That's right. Why am I punishing the people around me for something he did? So I just wrote it all down. I wrote it all down, went to his office the next day, said, look, I need to talk to you, like, you said some stuff yesterday, really upset me, and I couldn't sleep. He was like, oh God, I'm sorry, you couldn't sleep. And I was like, so I just broke it down. And I just said, look, you embarrassed me in front of the staff. You said you were surprised that I could do it, which made it seem like you didn't think I could do it. And I don't think you would have said that if Nick had presented that or somebody else had presented that. So the only conclusion I could come to is you just didn't think that me, a black editor, would be able to handle this big assignment. He was just like, I was like, nah, just let me finish. And I had like 3 more pages. Went through the stuff. You take other people to lunch, you don't take me to lunch. You had a party at your house. Everybody else on the desk was invited except me. I just went through the whole list. And then when I left there, he was just speechless. I walked out, I was feeling good. I mean, like, people were waiting, they knew I was gonna go in there and do it, they would give me high fives in the bathroom. I mean, it was great. But like, you have to stand up for that. And what I learned and what I tell people is, you don't have to be sure. You don't have to be sure. You only have to tell them how you feel. And so I learned this construction. This guy, a leadership guy, trained me once, like, when you have things that bother you, you figure out, so our construction is when you said, I feel because. When you said this, I feel that because this. And that is an easy way to sort of get your feelings out and not internalize them, and hopefully be able to pump conversations that can avoid those kinds of uncomfortable situations down the road. And I think I've benefited from that, and I've been able to help other people of color and women deal with issues around sexism and race like that.
So I was a managing editor in Houston, and we were in our rundown meeting, and this was a conference room of maybe about 20 people, and I forget how this conversation had transpired or what it broke, but this was about Dreamers, and my news director, not thinking, just yells, Gerardo, where's your green card?
Right.
I'm like, well, I have my driver's license and I'm a US citizen, but okay. And so it made the room feel uncomfortable. I let it go, but someone ended up calling corporate HR, and so 2 days later, we had to bring everyone back in, and she apologized to me in front of everyone, and I'm like, okay. But I had learned at a young age not to really create, unnecessary drama. I'm like, she knew she had stepped in a pile of crap. She probably knew she shouldn't have said that. I'm not gonna add any fuel to the fire, but you should know you did something wrong. And so I ended up letting it go, and I ended up leaving probably like a year later, and that's, I was like, bye, I don't respect you, and so, to this day, I'm obviously talking about it, but I'm over it.
I'm really over it, right?
I don't take a lot of grief, so I can't say that I have experienced episodes of overt sexism, but even though I've got a spine of steel, I also understand that that's not the experience of everybody that I supervise or have supervised, and so I try and be mindful of other people's experience with other people, and I'm not a report to HR kind of person. I'm more about how might we deal with this in a different way next time. How might you stand up for yourself so that you don't feel like somebody is abusing you in this way. We had it sometimes with language uses, particularly when we were kind of transitioning from, we were going in extremes, like we're not ever going to use illegal aliens anymore, and we were trying to figure out what language we would use for people who were living in the country illegally, and we had to pay attention because we had people who worked in our newsroom who were related to illegal aliens or who were living in the country illegally, and it was helpful to be able to have the conversation with those folks about how they might like to see themselves represented. So I think that's an important skill too, not to necessarily feel victimized, but understand how your actions might cause discomfort for somebody else and take action before it becomes discomfort.
And I think for me, when Greg said about assignments, as a starting reporter, I got really tired of Well, you can have the education beat. I'm not a mom, I don't have children, right?
What
But,
school?
you know, like, I mean, you know, I was like, okay, that could be your beat. I was like, well, that's really great, but, you know, I don't care, you know, no offense, don't care. I made it through grade school, I'm good. And I think the other thing in the radio environment, okay, it has to be all this balance, news chick, man who controls the show. Well, why is he in charge, right? And well, he's a man, he's got the man voice, you're the news chick, right? You know, so I think there are a lot of labels that happen in the broadcast that, well, we have to have 2 girls, 2 guys, we have to have 1 guy, 1 girl, you know, that just got really old, it just got really tired. But assignments, do I really have to be the one that covers education, funerals? Y'all knew I grew up good Catholic girl, right? Oh, it's happening in a church, send Kathy, you know, she'll go. Yeah, she's been in church, she won't embarrass us, she won't, like, you know, chewing gum and, you know, all that kind of, I cannot even begin to tell you how many churches I've been in Denver because I've covered a funeral there. I mean, unreal. It was like, unreal. Oh, she has black dresses, like up the yin yang. We just call her in the morning, and she'll put on the black dress and go cover the funeral. And you're laughing because you know it's true, right? You know it's true. So I would say the sexism came in the assignments more than anything. It's like, no, I want to go to Oklahoma City and cover the bombing. I want to go stand toe-to-toe with a police chief and go, how come your officers are shooting people in Denver? We talked about this. I had lived and worked in Albuquerque, and if there was an officer-involved shooting, now we have like a phrase for it, officer-involved shooting overnight, and you know, Colfax and you know whatever. In Albuquerque, officer-involved shooting meant the riot starts at 7 a.m. Right? We just had this very suspicious view of police and how they interacted, especially in low-income neighborhoods, that they just shot first and asked questions later. And I'm actually kind of shocked, that's a whole other tangent, but that in Denver, we just kind of go, officer-involved shooting. Well, why are they shooting people? Why are they shooting people? Because they can. Because they can. And that it's our role as journalists to stand back and go, I'm sure that person was scary, but shooting him, that was really the only option. I wanted to be the person standing in front of the police chief and going, I don't get it. And that's really the wonderful part of having access to like body cam video and listener generated, you know, viewer generated content is because sometimes we found out horrifying truths about the people who are hired to protect you. Not that part of me.
Keep going. What's the biggest ethical challenge you have ever faced? I'll open up here.
For me, my students, they know my story, so I'll walk.
I think wasn't there one prostitution story about Michael Hancock, which was like, would you say maybe about 5 or 6 days of discussions?
Well, but how much, all the time that we invested in it,
Mm-hmm.
and all the money we invested in it.
Mm-hmm. So this is a case where there have been an allegation by a former pimp who was convicted and was about to go to jail, who alleged that he had what do you call it? A ledger that purported to show that Michael Hancock had frequented a prostitution house.
Spelled wrong, though.
And it was spelled wrong. Yeah, we don't have to get into all that.
Spelled the dirty way.
Yeah, spelled the dirty way. And initially they wanted us to, and the election hadn't been held yet, so Michael wasn't the mayor yet. And that, you know, that a prostitute had recognized him by seeing him on TV, blah, 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 blah. So, you know, and that was being shot around town. And finally, a blogger kind of wrote it, you know, not in all of the his glory, but he kind of wrote it. It was out there. And so people were running up going, hey, you know, this blogger's already published this. You know, you got to publish it. You can publish it now. It's out there. It's reached a public, a public level now. And I was like, no, we don't get pushed into running stories. So a blogger writing something like that versus the Denver Post writing something like that, you're ever hear Dewey beats Truman, okay? Like if we do it, it's completely different. If the Washington Post had written a Cohen story versus BuzzFeed, it's a totally different issue, okay? And so I and my team, we engaged in a bunch of conversations about whether or not first it had reached a threshold where it was just a matter of course that we would publish it because it was already out there. Peter Boyles and everybody else was talking about it. But we're going to take a different road and do everything in our power to verify that ourselves, to authenticate the ledger, to authenticate the paper it was in, to meet the guy, to find out why, now it's coming out, to find out why Hancock's name was misspelled, to find out what was the way in which people hooked up with these prostitutes. So that they told us, well, you had to provide a credit card, and you had to have a cell phone number that they could call back. So we were like, okay, so give us all the cell phone numbers you ever used for your business. And then Michael Hancock, who was saying to us, hey, you can't run that story, if that story doesn't reach a level of proof, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, we'll give you every opportunity to prove it's not you. Give us your cell phone records for these years so that we can look at every number that you call from that cell phone, and if it matches one of those numbers, you got a problem, right? And so we go through this long negotiation with them, thinking that we're going to get these documents, right? And despite all this public pressure, like every day, Peter Boyles and other folks on radio, the Post is hiding and shielding for the mayor, and blah, blah, blah. And finally, Hancock gets elected, and we still are kind of waiting, right? And at the last minute, we've given them a deadline, like 5 o'clock on a Friday, that you've got to get these documents to us. We've been waiting. My own publisher is on my case about not publishing the story, because it's huge, right? And 5 o'clock comes, right, and they basically tell us, well, sorry, we're not going to give you the documents. We were like, what? And so at that point, we decided that we needed to tell the public everything that we had done, every agreement that had been made, every step we had taken to authenticate the record, and that now the mayor had broken a commitment to provide those cell phone records, okay? And it's because he had broken his promise to give us the cell phone records, we reported everything we knew up to that point. And what was it, 2 days later, they decided to give us those cell phone records, okay? And what I said to him was, it never had to be that way. I never wanted to publish an unverified story, but your failure to provide the documents you said you would that would allow you to exonerate yourself created this impression that you had something to hide. And at that point, we shared it with the public. And that was a long, torturous process for all of us. But as I was saying earlier, a bunch of us were involved in that process, that decision-making process, and overall I think it was good for our organization and the individual journalists in it. I wish we didn't have to publish that story because it didn't meet our standard, but we had an obligation to explain to our public why we had held off pulling the trigger for 7 or 8 days. So that was a part of it. And fairly long story, sorry.
I'd like to have, in just a few minutes we have remaining, each of you just address in just a couple of minutes. What would be one ethical rule for news writing and being a journalist in today's professional world for the students that are here with us in the audience, they should always keep in mind as they move forward into this career?
Wow, this is gonna sound so basic, but know what words actually mean.
Yes.
I am so shocked sometimes by the malaprop of English that I run across from time to time. Someone drowned, what happened to them? They're dead. And that sounds so incredibly basic, but if you're gonna be a journalist, understand what words mean. It's how we can have trustworthy communication.
Well, and a thesaurus is not a dictionary, that's the other thing, just.
Yes.
Don't copy and paste. Don't plagiarize. There was someone, I don't know if it was a Denver Post, that had fired someone because they had plagiarized. And they had just ripped something off and tried to claim it as their own.
Anyone else? Advice for our students?
I would like everybody to be fair with their sources, and I don't mean this sort of like, well, if somebody says someone was shot, then you have the other opinion that no, they weren't shot. I don't mean that kind of thing, but treat your sources as you wish to be treated, with accuracy and fairness and clarity. And since I got this experience today with a student journalist who got my whole life story completely wrong, don't be afraid to call up and re-verify your facts. One of my best learning lessons was working at the Rocky Mountain News across from a really good business reporter, and I'd hear him say, I don't get that, explain it to me again. I still don't understand it, explain it to me again. And then he would get down to this level, explain it to me like I'm a kindergartner, because I still don't understand it. And then he'd call back and say, okay, I just wanted to make sure I got it right. And there's no shame in that. It's way better to do that and irritate the hell out of somebody than to irritate them by having misrepresented what they said to you.
I would tell you that, understand that what you report can change people's lives. Like, really understand that. And try to ask yourself why the public needs to know what I have. And if you can answer that, and you can defend that, then publish it. And if you can't, and if there's any doubt, then, hold off until you're more sure. Because, as I said earlier, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And, I remember when I was a young editor, we found out that a minister had been caught in a strip club, and he was dancing naked on a table, and he was charged with lewd and lascivious behavior with like 17 other people. And I was like, what is a minister doing in a strip club? I forgot all about those 16 people. We just wrote, a minister was arrested yesterday in a strip club, blah, 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 blah. And 3 days later, he blew his brains out. So you gotta really think about the power that you have, and just make sure that you use it for right, and that you do it right.
You can always ask yourself, are you ready to go before a judge, jury, or a courtroom to explain your work?
Right.
Because a lot of times you'll be sued and you'll be deposed, and they'll say, okay, show me the work.
Right.
And then, of course, they can, plug holes, or, shoot holes into your story and go, nope, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, and then your credibility is just shot.
My parting words would be that it is still a very noble profession. It is a craft that comes with a great deal of responsibility, and no matter where we are in the business models or the business, the fortitude of what we have built as far as making money in journalism, it is still incredibly important, and it has been for this country in many hundreds of years, and will continue to be and play an important role. So thank you all for being here with us this evening. Let's give a round of applause to our Our next event, just to quickly take note, April 18th, it'll focus on the credibility of the news we get in an online environment. And the department will send you an email in just a few weeks from now. Have a great evening, and don't forget your ethics in your program. Thank you, Dan, it was fun.